Hello and welcome to our podcast for economics that we are calling Supply and the Law of Supply. So this is a companion podcast to the one we made the other day called Demand and the Law of Demand. We haven't quite put these together to create the supply and demand that we're coming up on next, but we're still looking at each side of the equation in isolation. So when we were talking about demand, we were talking about it from the angle of a consumer, somebody who would perhaps be purchasing something. In the supply side, we're looking at the producer's side, so the people who would be making or creating goods to potentially take to a market and sell. So as you go through this, think about the equation in terms of people selling product or services. So first off, what exactly is supply? This is the amount of stuff or services that can be sold at a certain price. So the amount of supply could be a supply of clothing or materials at a clothing store. Could be the amount of cell phones that are being sold at any one time. Bikes, all of the components that go into bikes, computers, burritos. It could also be services though, so think about this. The number of firefighters, the number of police officers, the number of teachers in the market. And so from a producer's side, how much stuff do they have to sell at any one time in the market? And that is supply. Why do producers offer goods and services for sale? Well, if you think about the free market principles that we've talked about in other podcasts, one of them is self-interest or profit motive. People are looking out for themselves. People want to make money for themselves. And so in order to do that, these people have to sell something. They need to sell some sort of good or service into the market that somebody wants to buy so that they can get that money and help themselves and use it however they want. So the first reason we have goods and services because of the fundamental selfishness of people, that we want to help ourselves and we feel we can help ourselves by making money. Well, in order to make money, you gotta sell something. We bring supply to the market. Now, there are other elements of this. People will sell things or services because there is a fundamental pride in the work that others find valuable. For example, firefighters. It's a very difficult service to provide the community and the market. And so there isn't really a tangible item to sell that firefighters have. It is their service. But the community values that service. So yes, people who are firefighters are looking for a paycheck. They need to be paid for their services, but they're also providing a service that the society and the market find valuable. We like it when our homes don't burn down. So the next element of this is once we've defined what supply is, meaning the amount of stuff people will sell, either goods or services in the market, we can define what we call the law of supply. And so this is the fact that producers will supply more of a successfully selling good in order to capture more profit. If somebody goes to market and says, oh my goodness, this widget is selling like crazy, everybody needs the widget, then that producer is going to make more of them. They're going to create a larger supply because they say, hey, if I can sell 100 widgets, why can't I sell 200? 500, a bazillion of these. If something is selling well, then it is going to push producers to create a larger supply. And a very good example is the idea of the iPod. When Apple started making this iPod, they saw that people were banging down the door to buy this iPod. They thought this was great. I can put my entire CD collection on this tiny little device and then carry it with me all the time. And so Apple was selling a lot of these. Apple then turned around and said, we need more of them to sell. And so the more we're selling, the more we're gonna make. The more profit we will make, the more supply we will create. And in the bottom right, you can actually see the chart of that. At the beginning of every year, when a new device came out, then Apple would increase their supply. People really wanted these products and they were selling well. So Apple would then turn around and make sure they had enough supply in order to maximize their profit. And so a variation on that is not only did Apple create more of the Apple iPod Classic, but then they said, hey, what about making a smaller size? We'll make the Nano. Or maybe we could even make the iPod Shuffle. What a great way to sell these to people who are working out and need to clip it to some clothing so it doesn't fly away as they're racing their bike at 30 miles an hour. Because Apple saw that they could sell more of these because the demand was there, they in turn created more supply, not only in terms of sheer numbers of the Classic, but they started to diversify in terms of the supply of types of product. So take a break for a second and think about this. We need to do a little economics math. In order to make money, in order to make profit, we have to think about what is the price that a supplier can sell something at. That's going to be the revenue. So if I sell an iPhone for $100, that is my revenue. But I don't actually profit $100 because I have to take the price I got for that phone and subtract all of the costs that it cost to make that phone. So I have to think about all the materials that I had to buy to make the phone. I have to think about all the labor costs, advertising costs, transportation costs. All of those things are lumped together into costs. And let's say that's $50 of cost. If I take the price I got, my revenue, minus what it cost me to make that item, that is my profit. So in our scenario, if I got $100 cash for that phone, but it cost me $50 to make it, I profited $50. I gained an extra $50 in the selling of that product. And so as we move forward in this idea of supply and the law of supply, we want to talk about some of the many factors that can go into what would cause a company to make more of something or to make less of something. So let's go ahead and see what we're talking about. So as we go through, we're looking at effects on supply. And again, the law of supply was if people can earn more money on something, they will increase the supply of it. Vice versa, if they don't think they can make money on something, the supply will go down. So one effect on supply is the price of the actual good. So if the Apple company feels that they're making enough profit on this, they will keep it at that price. At the same time, if other competitors say, hey, this whole tablet market thing seems to be really taking off. People want this kind of middle ground between their smartphone that has a small screen and their laptop or their desktop that has a bigger screen. It seems like there's a lot of money to be made in tablet computers. And then all of a sudden, the supply of the generic tablet computer goes through the roof. Every company thinks that they can make money in this market. BlackBerry makes one, Samsung, LG, they all start jumping into the market of tablet computers. It's not the specific iPad supply that may or may not be changing, it's the entire supply of tablet computers that can be changing. If the price of the good is pretty high and people think they can make a decent profit from it, everybody's going to be in to try and get a piece of that profit with that element in the market. Another thing that matters in terms of supply are input costs. What does it cost to make this product? If raw materials, energy, labor costs, land, all those natural resources, if those prices go up, then it's going to cost me more to make it, then I'm probably not going to make as much profit. And if I'm not going to make very much, I'm probably not going to make very much of my finished product. Because again, the law of supply is if I can make a lot of money at the end, I will make more supply. But if certain input costs start to change and my ending profit changes and goes up or down, that's going to help me decide whether I make a lot of these. The price of related goods can also help us determine how much supply to make. So for example, Trix cereal brand and then a competitive, more generic brand of Pranks. I don't even know what that is, but it's probably pretty similar to Trix. Fruity flavored, crunchy, sugary cereal thing. If Trix sells for $1 a box and the generic Pranks costs 50 cents a box, and both companies feel that they can make profit in the sugary, fruity cereal market, then there's going to be more supply of that on your shelves. Both companies, maybe even more companies, feel they can make money on this narrow part of the market. You're going to see a ton of fruity flavored sugary cereals. Another element that can affect supply is the idea of expectations. For example, back in the 80s, a company was making these Cabbage Patch Kids, these kind of lifelike dolls that were cute and they had a little birth certificate, whatever. And as the early rollout of this product came about, people started saying, yeah, I totally want that for my kid. I think that would be a great holiday gift. And so the company that was making them tried to put out as much supply as they possibly could. The product was barely out there, but expectations about it were exceptionally positive. And so the company said, hey, we could probably make a lot of profit from this doll. Let's make a lot of them. And at the time we're making this, the Apple Watch is potentially on the horizon. Apple has advertised that they're making this. These are set to go into production and into the marketplace relatively soon. Kind of depends on what people are thinking. If people say, yeah, I totally want a wearable computer that looks like a watch, then Apple will need to provide supply for that. If a lot of people have the hype and the expectation, they'll want to make a lot of supply if they feel like they could make a lot of money. This next one, the number of suppliers in terms of how supply is created, kind of relates to comparable goods. So while we might have Doritos and then the store brand, we're definitely going to see that in the cell phone industry. That we're going to have perhaps the iPhone, perhaps the Samsung. Back in the day, we had BlackBerry. But as more companies see that money can be made in this part of the market, not only are they going to create generic brands, but they're going to all jump into the market and try to sell that product. If money can be made in cell phones, then you're going to have Samsung, Nokia, T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, all jumping in and creating massive supply of this product. And in effect, they are making comparable goods. If you don't like the Apple iPhone, you have plenty of choices to make. But again, since all of these companies feel that they can make a ton of money, they're going to continue to create supply of this product. Because if profit can be made, then suppliers want to get in the game and make money themselves. The last element we would look at in terms of the amount of supply that's out there is the societal value or need. So for example, the new Tesla cars. Society pretty much needs cars here in the United States. Do we need completely electric cars? Maybe, maybe not. Do we need high-end luxury electric cars? Maybe, maybe not. Since this is a relatively new part of the market, moving from gas-powered to electric-powered vehicles, there is not a huge supply of Tesla cars out there. Some people want them, absolutely, but very few people are able to pay the $60,000 that these things cost. Tesla says, yes, we can make some money on this new innovation of an electric car. We can't make a ton of money though yet because people just aren't ready for it, but we can make some, so we will supply some. Now in 10 years, maybe the nation is ready for all electric cars. Then Tesla would say, hey, if everybody's buying an electric car and we have the technology to do it, we can make a ton of money. Let's make more Tesla cars. And hence, the supply goes up when the potential profit goes up. And so when we did the demand podcast, we had a demand graph. And if you don't remember, it kind of looked like this. Since we are now looking at the supply side from the seller's side, we have a graph that looks like this over on the right. You have quantity of stuff across the bottom, so the amount of something. And on the vertical axis, we have the price. And so you can see that the supply graph has a positive slope, meaning it increases as you move farther to the right. So in effect, the higher price I can get for something as a seller, the more I'm going to make. If I know that I can make $500 for an iPad, I'm going to make more of them. But if for some reason I can only make $50 for an iPad, I'm not going to make a whole heck of a lot of them because it's not in my best interest to make them. I'm not making a lot of profit. So if price goes up, supply will go up. If price goes down, amount of them goes down. And so we hinted at this on some of the earlier slides, but who exactly determines the amount to supply and therefore the price of those goods since they are interchangeable? Is it the buyer or the seller, or just the market itself? And I think you'll see when we talk about supply and demand at the same time in our next podcast, you'll see that it's kind of the market forces. If I want to sell my iPad for $10,000, that's great price for me, but no one's going to want it at that price. So I have to figure out where can I bring it down to so people will actually spend the money and buy my product. Vice versa, if I sell my super cool iPad for $10, everybody's going to want it because that's really, really cheap for something that's that cool. And so I'm probably at first not going to have enough supply of it because it sells out too quickly. This very delicate balance between buyers and sellers, between demand and supply, will help determine the price that things can sell for and then the amount that suppliers should make. So that's about it in terms of our look at supply and the law of supply. Again, we're thinking from the producers or the sellers' end this time, and this is different from demand, where we're looking at the consumers or the buyers' end. In our next podcast, we'll put these two together, talk about the interaction between supply and demand and how that all works. Pretty interesting. But for now, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please bring those into class. Otherwise, we will see you soon. Thanks.